Mr. Speaker, we have just listened to the presentation of Mr. Joseph Hamilton, Honorable Member. And I must agree with him that members of all parties must be allowed to campaign in all parts of this country, free from violence and terror. Well, Mr. Speaker, the tenor of this motion and his presentation is suggesting that civil disturbances or public disorder or riot or by whatever name called simply erupted by a group of people prone to violence and destruction. To this, Mr. Speaker, I would respectfully disagree and posit that the riots on May 11 erupted and were the result of people being aggravated and excited by issues in the society which irritated them. Be that as it may, Mr. Speaker, it is the responsibility of the state to protect its citizens through the provision of an efficient police service. In this country, that falls within the purview of the Ghana Police Force, which the government at the time was responsible for administering. That force has as its object, inter alia, the repression of internal disturbance and the protection of property. Section 3(2) of the Police Act, Chapter 1601. The government should not take communities or sections of it for granted, but should avoid actions which can be interpreted as intended to encourage electoral misconduct. Instead, the body language and overt acts of political parties, particularly those with state power, ought to promote cohesive behavior rather than such acts which tend to irritate and excite residents of the community and eventually lead to the building of anger and eventually the eruption of violence in the community. Mr. Speaker, I refer to prevention. Prevention encourages the removal of causes of public disorder before it occurs. And part of what is done is by gathering intelligence about potential hotspots, so that warning flags of impending conflict may be observed at the earliest possible moment and steps taken to prevent them. This is teaching standard all over the world. Other sensible methods and measures could have been found to avoid public disorder in that community. But those who were in power in those days badly mishandled the police so that the intelligence they ought to have received was not forthcoming. We have heard from the honorable member a lot about damage and destruction which occurred. It is true that statistics can be compiled, but they do not tell us of the injury, the psychological injury, the pain and suffering and the disruption to life which these disturbances cause. The human cost, pain and suffering is never properly revealed. alienation and distrust are planted and are fed like a raging monster. Mr. Speaker, these are staggering and lingering costs which cannot be shown in any concrete way. But nevertheless, they must be recognized, for only then can we appreciate the full cost of anarchy. Mr. Speaker, since the PPP came to office in 1992, we have become accustomed to electoral violence, either before, during, or after the elections. I would not return to 1992, but let me fast forward to 1997 general elections. That election was filled with violence. I can recall working it. I can recall also that issues were raised about the conduct of that election that led to an inquiry, I think the Cross Commission. And then there, as a result of the Cross Commission, there was a motion, I think, moved by Esther Pereira in the High Court, at the end of which the judge found that that election was so badly flawed that the best result was to vitiate it. That was the first time an election, in my recollection, has been vitiated. In other words, non-existent, never occurred. The issues then have prevailed throughout our electoral process on several occasions. Permit me, please, Mr. Speaker, to enumerate some acts which have irritated the Guyanese public, or sections of it. Electors registered were displaced and could not vote because of the absence of their names from the voters' list where they were to vote. The public's perception.
Honourable Member, you are speaking on the motion proposed by the Honourable Joseph Hamilton?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Election day violence?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, because it is important to reference these points in dealing with 2015.
I will urge the Honourable Member to stay closely to the point for which he is claiming the attention of the Speaker. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me put it generally that there have been suspicions and perceptions about electoral irregularities, and even in Sophia. Mr. Speaker, one of the causes of public disorder is rumors and perceptions which are not easily controlled. Rumors tend to snowball so quickly that issues which start as without grounding eventually pick up life later on. These issues rile up the public and put them on guard against recurrences of acts during every election. We avoid the Honourable Hamilton repeating what the residents of Sophia in the crowd were saying. We want, we vote, we want, we ballot boxes. Mr. Speaker, on that day, I was responsible for polling stations in Ayfield. In 2011, I was responsible for polling stations in Seafield, not far away from Kublal's residence. And after that election, residents asked me, how could the PPP get so many votes in Sophia? We didn't vote. It is that feeling in 2015. It is that feeling in 2015. Now, I fast forward to 2015. When the people saw the Honorable Member Mr. Hamilton in front of Kublal's residence with certain materials which resembled election materials, because they had voted and they saw similar containers used as ballot boxes. And so they felt that he and his companions were taking ballot boxes into that house. And that is why I was referencing these incidents, because the people were annoyed. They felt that an illegal polling station was being set up there. And so they assembled around that house to bring attention to what they perceived to be an illegality which would have been taking place again. Mr. Speaker,
Honourable Member, you have to await your turn in the list. I do not know whether you're done to speak, but let us allow the Honourable Member to make a statement.
in fact, Mr. Speaker, if those in authority at that time had taken into account these malpractices and had moved to correct them, a much more acceptable environment would have existed. Perceptions would have been removed, and the likely result being prevention of election day violence. Violence would have resulted. Mr. Speaker, when you speak to persons in Sophia, they will tell you of the house the Honourable Member mentioned, and they will only talk to you about it in terms of what they perceive, what illegalities they perceive would have been happening there. Sir, I agree with the Honourable Member when he said that we must be allowed to campaign freely all over. I believe in that. I subscribe to that. The Saturday before the 2015 elections, May 9th, I drove around the area and I passed through Seafield and I saw a huge cup in front of a house in red. And when I inquired, they said that that was Kublal's house, a PPP supporter. That's what I said. I felt happy. I was proud of the level of tolerance which the residents of Sophia was exercising in the face of all the APNU paraphernalia around, and this one cup was there undisturbed. The people accepted Kublal. Kublal as a businessman was supported by the residents. They went to his church. They did not boycott it like some other churches in Georgetown. They seemed quite comfortable having Kublal. But what irritated the public was when my honorable friend and the election, the materials he had which resembled election material, they suspected wrongdoings. They have told me, Mr. Speaker, that when they challenged Honorable Member Hamilton and his colleagues, they did not get the response which would have satisfied them. And he walked away, went back into the building and left them out there. And then the entire thing went out of control. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member spoke of Inspector John Singh. I would have taken the speaker's caution, because I am in possession of the conduct of that inspector on that day. And I visited the divisional commander. Myself and two other of my retired colleagues, we visited Commander Griffith's office to complain about the action taken by that inspector. You see, Mr. Speaker, policing a community during an election requires impartial police. They talk about neutrality of the police. You cannot have neutrality of the police and the question of statements being given to the opposition. This statement, I wonder how we got it. Under normal conditions, I know, the statement ought to be sent through the Commissioner of Police. The Commissioner must decide whether that statement should have gone where it now is. So, Mr. Speaker, the conduct of that crowd, the inability to control it over long hours, all rests with the fact that the people were distrustful of the police. The people felt that they could get no justice from the police because the police tended to be on one side. Kublan also was named to me as identified to me as like a go-to man in the community. You want a community policing group? You have to go to Kublan. But yet, he was displaying in an overt way where his political support lied. Once you're associated with the police, you have to be neutral or appear to be neutral. Neutral all the time. You want me over there? Mr. Speaker, on the night of May 11, 2015, they saw images of 2011 about to take place, and they could not stand their votes being stolen in front of their faces. They wanted their votes to count. On election, Mr. Speaker, inasmuch as the honorable member was reading from documents and so on, he never told us that election day violence was incited by the insensitivities of they on the other side. Let us recall in the morning at St. Sidwell School, a known PPP miscreant ended up.
Honorable member, I think we should try to keep our language somewhat careful.
Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to describe him because I didn't want to call his name.
Honorable member, no, you should not call his name.
I will not call his name, sir.
And no, you will not describe them, whoever to whom you refer, you will not say miscreant. Please proceed.
Well, a well-known and mischievous fellow who operates for the PPP and has been in constant trouble all over Georgetown. He turned up in the midst of a polling station when he was not named on the list. No, I'm not, no. He's much shorter. And it is only the intervention of, the wise intervention of the current president, who was leader of the opposition then, that allowed them to enjoy a good life now. Got no broken jaw, he's lucky.
To stay with that.
We also, I also have.
Honorable Member Giltashira, you wish the floor?
Mr. Speaker, I really take umbrage on the point of order and
Yes.
to do with contents of speeches. That one, I understand your ruling to deal with not naming a person who's not a member of this House. However, to call the person a miscreant of the People's Progressive Party is unacceptable, sir. And secondly, sir, that this person was seriously injured and in hospital. I think these insensitive and derogatory tones do not behoove this House at all, sir. And it's sad, it's a sad day. Thank you.
Member, please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, the incident which really took me to Sparendam Police Station is one in which another PPP, known PPP supporter, who once operated a cinema in Georgetown, was seen in presence at the polling station. And he approached the polling station under the guise that he was there to collect a ballot box. And the residents promptly turned him away. Mr. Speaker, that matter ended up in an accident on the public road, and the handling of that matter there is what took me to Sparendam Police Station, to the divisional commander, a member of the public. Mr. Speaker, the culminative effect of provocative acts is one which results in communal violence. It happened, there's sufficient justification. Mr. Speaker, the issues at hand here is how the previous government administered the affairs of public safety in this society, to the point where they could do very little or nothing to prevent an outbreak of violence. It is their problem, sir. We, on this side of the House, would recognize that the recklessness which took place in maintaining order in this state is what resulted in all the violence and mayhem which we have become accustomed to at election time. Mr. Speaker, I can't support this motion. In effect, violence is to be abhorred. People are injured and we should sympathize with them. We should comfort them. But when you administer the state where you cannot protect your citizens and you allow their properties to be destroyed by your negligence, you should not come to this House and ask for compensation. We cannot reward you for negligence. Mr. Speaker, the motion before this House must fail. While we are in sympathy with those who suffered injury and destruction of property, we know that this falls squarely at the feet of those who run the affairs of this country. And like I say again, and for emphasis now, I would not support this motion, and it must fail. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I thank you. Mr. Speaker, I will not be as long nor as in-depth as the previous speakers. But sir, I start by saying that I'm sad that we're even having this debate today. In the year of our 50th anniversary, when we should be seeking to heal this nation. This debate, Mr. Speaker, in my opinion, resolves nothing. Since, in my opinion, there is no innocent party. We can all do better. Both sides of this House, we can strive to work together to ensure that the sins of the past should never be repeated. Mr. Speaker, it would have been a better motion, in my opinion, if this motion was one that calls on all political parties.
Member, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sir, in my opinion, it would have been a better motion if this one was a motion that calls on all political parties to work together to end election day violence once and for all. We have been plagued and held back, sir, by this tragedy. Mr. Speaker, from the outset, I'd like to make this very clear, that this administration is against all forms of violence. Not only violence on election day, violence as a whole. We are equally committed to seeking out the perpetrators of this violence. We should do all that is necessary to bring these persons to justice. However, sir, bringing these persons to justice, whoever they may be, whichever side of the House, whoever we would like to ascribe the blame to, is a function of the police force and our courts. It is not the responsibility of this Parliament to act as judge, jury, and compensator. It is not the responsibility of this Parliament, sir, in my opinion, to ascribe blame to one section or the other of this population. Mr. Speaker, that, sir, is the first reason why I do not support this motion. Mr. Speaker, I was a bit disappointed because I was under the impression that when the mover of this motion, in bringing it to this House, I was on the assumption that he was going to provide us with further details on what transpired on that tragic day. Since he was present at one of the incidents for which he is seeking compensation. I was hoping, Mr. Speaker, that he would take the opportunity to explain to this August Assembly all that transpired on that fateful day. Everything that happened on that fateful day, and he would have taken the opportunity to bare his soul, in front of us here, so that he could make a case for compensation. Sir, the second reason why I cannot support this motion is the actual timing, the time frame. It is limited, sir. It is limited to election day. Sir, well, what about the activities that preceded election day 2015? Why are there no calls for compensation to the persons that were affected prior to E-Day 2015? Mr. Speaker, in particular, I can make reference to an activist in Region 5 who was viciously assaulted by a known member of a party that contested the last elections. That activist, sir, spent 2 weeks in intensive care. However, as I started off by saying, this is a police matter. The court shall decide who is guilty, and the court should decide what compensation is necessary, not this parliament. Sir, what about the wife of an activist in Enmore, who was beaten not once, not twice, but 3 times, sir. 3 times. By a group of known supporters of a party that contested the 2015 elections. Once again, this is a police matter. When whoever were the perpetrators of that crime, sir, are found guilty, the court will dispense justice and compensation. Mr. Speaker, as I said, this administration will not condone any type of violence, election time or not. Moreover, sir, I can attest during the E-Day, none of the leader of the opposition, sir, took time out of campaigning and administering the polls to actually go to a polling station to ensure, personally go to a polling station, ensure that no person, even a candidate of the one of the parties that contested the election, was not harmed. Sir, I myself had reason to intervene at the Transfiguration Church to ensure that the voters remain calm, and I will repeat what I told them: keep your eye on the ball, sir. No one can steal this election from us. Desperate people do desperate things. And at that stage, when I was at Transfiguration Church, I realized, sir, the other parties contesting the elections were getting desperate. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say this, that I am proud, sir, of all the 420,000 odd voters that came out on E-Day, who exercised their franchise. I'm also proud, sir, of the other sectors who chose not to come out for whatever reason. They expressed their franchise, voted, and they helped, sir, and I must thank them in particular, they helped us to have a regime change. And by having a regime change, they signal to this country that they would like to move forward. Sir, on behalf of all 420, both sides, I mean, they voted for the party which they chose. Correctly, unfortunately, sir, the majority of them voted for the now administration. Sir, I'd like to deliver this message to them. One, that we don't condone violence. Two, that we will be spending all of our 5 years in government, the first 5 years in government, to ensure, sir, that we can heal whatever risk there is between us, resolve any myths or any misconceptions that they would have. Sir, we would ask, and I ask now the members on the opposition side to join me and to join my to join me and my administration in trying, sir, in our 58th year. This is a plea. It is a plea to you to join us to ensure that whatever transpired, not from 2015 we're talking about, all the way back from 1992, all the way forward, that it never happens again. Sir, with those few points, sir, I once again say that I cannot support the motion. I think it's ill-placed. I think it serves no purpose at the moment, other than seeking to divide us further. With those few words, Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Mr. Speaker, we have all had a very long night, and perhaps it is unfortunate that we end, though I believe we have 2 other motions to do, but that we would have entered into a debate on violence on the 11th of May, but which, Mr. Speaker, inevitably went beyond the 11th of May, and we found ourselves reluctantly, but in vain, going back into the 1960s. It is for this reason that I even hesitated to speak. There are few people in this House, and the last speaker is one of them, who is a long-standing member, General Secretary of the People's Progressive Party. I don't hear the word civic mentioned much recently, but the point that I'd like to make, Mr. Speaker, is that the Honourable Member Rohi is a seasoned politician. He has been in this House for 23 years, and before that, a political activist for many more. Along with him would be Honourable Member and Prime Minister Mr. Moses Nagamootoo, and the Honourable Member Dr. Rupert Rupnaraine. Violence has been a feature of elections in this country, not on the 11th of May only, but for decades. And I think that point was quite well articulated by the Honourable Member Mr. Lumumba, who started off very well, but I noticed veered into Georgetown and crashed. Mr. Speaker, the point I'd like to make is that this debate is necessary, it is needed, but as I remarked to some colleagues earlier, it has to be managed. And I wouldn't use the word controlled, but managed. This nation needs a catharsis, undoubtedly. But is this the manner in which it is to be done? I certainly came expecting a debate on issues and incidents that took place on the 11th of May, primarily in the Safai area, where indeed I was present for about half an hour. But as I said, inevitably we went beyond that. And statements were made tonight about centrally directed and controlled. But the truth is, Mr. Speaker, I believe I can borrow the words, with his permission, of Mr. Yussi Kwayana. There's a little booklet that he published entitled No Guilty Race. My grandmother is buried in Buxton, yes. I have no difficulty in saying that. No guilty race. Those are the words of Mr. Kwayana's book. Because if we go to start the process, Mr. Speaker, of pointing fingers and naming names, we're going to find, as I believe Honourable Member Lumumba pointed out, is that all sides have been violent against each other over the decades. Yes. The Honourable Member at midnight seeks to be a bit ingenious. Why would you call ingenious, but he is being disingenuous? Why would you call on both sides to move forward if you're not saying that both sides were together causing a problem? The point I'm making, Mr. Speaker, exactly, that is the point I am making. Both sides, Mr. Speaker, both sides. The Honourable Member didn't say that both sides had been violent, but he did point out that violence in elections, and he didn't name a side, but he said that violence in elections has been a feature from not 2015, not 2011, not in 2001, not in 1997, not in 1992, but before. In fact, Mr. Speaker, and for fear of being upbraided even by the chair, the historian and now leader of this country has a paper on the violence in this country. We are a violent society. One only has to look at recent events, whether they be in West Coast Berbice, or the murder of an 18-year-old coming in from London whose death was planned even before he could arrive. We were born out of violence. Slavery, the horrors of indentureship and the violations of women in the field. We moved into, Mr. Speaker, colonial, getting into our Republican status or even independence, violence. We have not had a catharsis. This motion has opened some wounds. We on this side of the House at this hour, Mr. Speaker, will not get into tit for tat and naming, because we each have an experience that we can cite of either personal experience or anecdotally. We can put up our own reference points and our own exhibits as well. Each one of us can do so. Each one of us, Mr. Speaker, I have a cousin out of Golden Grove, Rastaman that sells corn, ventured too far into another village, and the beating that he got, Mr. Speaker, the beating that he got. This is my cousin from Golden Grove, Nabaklis. I remember, Mr. Speaker, going to New Amsterdam at about 2 o'clock one morning and having to rescue a man who had been shot at on a certain village in West Coast Berbice, taking him to the police station and then getting him support. But let me come, Mr. Speaker, to May the 11th, 2015, because as I said, we have opened some wounds, and if we don't know how to manage them, they will be left, Mr. Speaker, oozing. May the 11th. During the day of May the 11th, Mr. Speaker, mayhem, there were reports of confusion and mayhem and violence throughout the country, and reports of violence throughout the country. In some instances, honourable members, now Prime Minister of Guyana and Honourable Member Harmon went down to Turning Point to quell a situation. I had been there earlier and I left. Then there were other reports which, Mr. Speaker, caused me to have to call a member who is in this House and say to him, what is going on? Your name is being mentioned. And he said, you know, my name comes up. I said, let's not allow this situation to get out of hand. That member is not a member of the government benches, Mr. Speaker, with whom I spoke on May the 11th, to try to bring some order and to call off what was a bad situation arising against supporters of the APNU plus AFC. So it is not a one-sided affair that we were led to believe tonight and all night, that only members of a certain persuasion or supporters of a particular party were the only ones subjected to violence. As I sat, Mr. Speaker, in our command center all day, I received reports from the Rupununi of beatings and harassment and persons being prevented from exercising their franchise on behalf of the APNU and the AFC. Mr. Speaker, yes, on election day. I received reports, Mr. Speaker, from various parts of Georgetown of complaints of people being harassed and prevented from being allowed to vote. Mr. Speaker, I received reports from various parts of Georgetown of persons being interfered with, and that, I'm making it up, and that people, Mr. Speaker, were making attempts to snatch ballot boxes. We don't know. Mr. Speaker, I'm told that these are all fabrications, but you know what, Mr. Speaker? You know, Mr. Speaker, we're still in the early part of the mid-morning. We haven't yet gotten to 6 o'clock when I went to Sophia. I'm getting there. But Mr. Speaker, Starbuck News of the 12th of May, 20 minutes, only 5 have gone, of the 12th of May, 2015. Just quickly, Mr. Speaker, not my statement, but the newspapers here and the date. Mr. Speaker, this report is a very detailed report of incidents throughout the city. A photograph of one known person who is associated with the now opposition, looking okay. And then, Mr. Speaker, and I quote, "At least 4 men were taken into police custody after being accused of attempting to steal ballot boxes in the Tocqueville-Guy-Hawk area." Am I going to get your protection, please, sir? One of them received a song thrashing and was handed over to the police. Early in the day, a statement from the police said that as a result of expressions of intimidation by members of the electorate, coupled with a few incidents in Georgetown, the police commissioner had called in the chief of staff, the Starbuck News. Mr. Speaker, I turn to another part of that story. Persons in the area said that a man was dropped off in the area by a known PPPC affiliate who is also a former policeman. And when the man was caught, the affiliate drove away smiling. As the crowd grew, a decision was taken to close the gates to one of the polling stations, the Starbuck News. Mr. Speaker, nothing tells us that this was a one-sided affair. Nothing tells us, Mr. Speaker, that whatever happened was centrally directed, even though, as I said, I had cause to call one member and said, "What is going on? Your name is being cited." And that member assured me, indeed, that it was false. And I accepted that member's statement to me that it was false. Because, Mr. Speaker, one of us already, our members spoke about rumors and the damage that rumors caused. I believe it was Honourable Member Felix, who I believe sought to set out the anatomy, the etiology of a riot, of a mob, and how it transforms from anger to viciousness. That is what I believe, with his police training, the honourable member was attempting to do. If, with your leave, sir, I'd just like to quote, "Persons in a crowd," and I will not call names, "formed a human walkway as named person who emerged from the building. The crowd erupted in anger, hurling slurs and other remarks at him. He later walked to the police vehicle which sped off. He was not physically harmed." Starbuck News, not the APNU AFC coalition making these statements. He was not physically harmed. Mr. Speaker, I later received reports, and I come now quickly to Sophia. I received reports that there was something untoward taking place in Sophia. that the police, in fact, asked, I telephoned Commissioner of Police to find out. They said they needed some support because people were gathering. I took a decision to go, maybe correctly or incorrectly, but having spoken on the phone and being told that perhaps someone senior should go, I did go. I met their honorable member, Mr. Joseph Hamilton, a person I've known for many years, not given to frivolous statements or to mischievous statements. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Hamilton, now Honorable Hamilton, informed me that there were some accusations being made against the structure where he was. I pause to say, Mr. Speaker, that there were, in my view, some characters around of dubious character with criminal antecedents lurking around the place. I did notice. I was invited by the honorable member to enter into the building, which I did. With me was Mr. Priya Singh. Toured the building, saw nothing that would have caused me to feel that there was anything strange happening there. I then went on to a canter truck at the back of it, spoke to the crowd saying, I have found nothing, I have seen nothing, they should disperse. That is my account, and within, as I said, half an hour or less, I left the scene. I later learned that other things were happening. That is what happened. There was no centrally directed anything taking place. And as I said, I believe the honorable member Felix quite professionally set out the anatomy of how things moved to a flashpoint. Mr. Speaker, let me move forward to 2 a.m. on the morning of the 12th of May, when myself and the co-campaign manager, Honorable Member Harmon, were asked by GCOM to come into commission to meet with the PPP civic officials and ourselves with GCOM to work out a plan, because at various points around the country, crowds, some may refer to them as mobs, were preventing ballot boxes from being moved. And we were told in the presence of the PPP civic officials that supporters of both sides were blocking the roads and blocking polling stations, and our support was requested at 2 a.m. to get released so that a convoy could move from Ithaca village, get past Blairmont where there was one blockage, get past Bath Settlement where there was another, and get past, Mr. Speaker, other blockages along the east coast of Demerara. Both of us were held culpable in terms of political parties on that night. Both of us had crowds. So in closing, Mr. Speaker.
I'll remember you have 5 minutes more.
Thank you. So, Mr. Speaker, as I said, I will close as I started. I can go through all of this. But the issue of violence in Guyana, the issue of violence particularly surrounding elections pre, during, and post, is not something to be trifled with. It needs, in my view, a commission of inquiry or a truth and reconciliation commission, because that is the only way it will be settled. Coming here and scoring points is not going to do it. We believe, Mr. Speaker, I believe, as Minister Patterson said, we abhor the violence. We, Mr. Speaker, have been the victims ourselves. Mr. Speaker, we would like to see it end, indeed. We agree that it takes the two to get together to bring an end to it, but we also believe, Mr. Speaker, that left to our own devices, that is not likely to happen. And in these settings, where all kinds of things may be said, misinterpreted, Mr. Speaker, and Bob Marley, as they say, God rest the dead, his name is invoked and his lyrics, Mr. Speaker, are quoted quite liberally, we are not going to find the solutions. The Starbuck News again, Mr. Speaker, it's long stock teeth, of May the 15th, 2015. It says, Sapphire attack is criminal and not political. Sapphire attack, criminal and not political. Kublal said that he strongly believes that what happened to him and the others was not a political thing. It was a criminal thing. These people are giving the parties a bad name. They did not respond when the party members asked them to leave. They stayed because they wanted to rob and loot my home and my neighbor's home. We are now being asked as a government to recognize that this was political violence when the main person affected, and we have no doubt that he has been, and we empathize, has said that it was not a political act. Yet we are being blamed and told that we must find compensation. And lastly, as I take my seat, Mr. Speaker, on May the 11th, the government of this country was the PPP Civic, in control of the armed forces. They were in control of the armed forces, not the APNU and AFC. If the leadership failed, it failed over there at a certain spot. If the security collapsed, it collapsed because of the poor leadership over there. But all I'm saying, that the blame lies at your feet, sir, for the failures on the 11th of May. And I have no apologies for saying so. So, Mr. Speaker, in closing, the standing orders of this House say that no motion shall be brought that relates to a matter with which the government is not officially concerned. This APNU and AFC government was not concerned in any way with the events of the 11th of May. We were not the government, and so we cannot be held responsible when we were not the government on the 11th of May. We share the view that it needs to be, Mr. Speaker, that we share the view that there needs to be a holistic approach, perhaps even a professional approach to this, but we shall not accept the blame. The blame lies squarely in the opposition benches. With that said, I thank you, Mr. Speaker.